Mr. Kamath, thank you and grateful to you for spending so much time with us here this evening. I'm going to take a little bit more, so if you could please be seated. It's always wonderful to hear from you, and you gave us a very sort of comprehensive synopsis of what you believe the road ahead for India looks like. I know you've said this previously in interviews that we've done, that it is a 25-year runway that you believe India has the ability to enjoy. You also gave us a very quick synopsis of what the world looks like today. And I want to pick up on some of these issues that you spoke of in the context of another event that we are going to be marking, and it's a pretty significant milestone that we will be marking this week itself, where India will overtake China in becoming the most populous country in the world. And it has its advantages and it has its downsides as well. You talked about productivity gains, you talked about technology and technology adoption. You know, we often speak of our demographic advantage. How do you see this milestone, and what do you believe it means from a risk perspective, especially when we talk about the India story over the next 25 years?
Shereen, it's a very appropriate question at this point in time. The first thought that comes to my mind is it's a positive, for a very simple reason. If we were at a stage where we would have built a lot of the things that we need to build, I would have said, you know, we could be facing a challenge. But given that by all assessments we have a 25-year runway, to build essential things, we are not talking of anything esoteric, to build essential things, we need the people and we need a young population. We need a young population not only to build, but also to consume. And I think that provides us a unique advantage in terms of having the force, as it were, to build, and having the ability to consume what we are producing. Of course, we will export as we go along, but I do not necessarily believe that we will export the way some other countries have been exporting. Because we have a large domestic market, and at the growth rate that we are going, we can well afford to have domestic consumption as the primary driver and exports as a subsidiary set. So this comes in at the right time.
Okay, you believe it comes in at the right time, but I'll just press you a little bit more on that. So you talked about the consumption power, and specifically the consumption power of the domestic economy. And while we are seeing investments pick up and continues to be largely driven by government capex at this point in time, the question though is, for this young population, are we going to be able to provide the kinds of jobs that we need to, especially in an era where you're talking about the possibility of chat GPT taking over jobs, making automated jobs redundant, or making jobs redundant on account of automation? The impact of that, do you believe it is going to be, as many headlines are suggesting, apocalyptic, or do you believe that this is something that we will be able to digest as we move forward?
I think nothing is static. Things keep moving. I would still talk of the India advantage. And let me put one thing in context. 5 years back, who would have believed that India would be such a big, and I'll use a very simple term, back office to the world, you know, call it managed services or whatever. So much so that everyone is caught by surprise. I wasn't, I can tell you, when we say that our services exports are now not only, you know, probably the fastest growing side of exports, but we now are a net surplus on that. Everybody thought that we will keep spending money on paying royalty payments and so on. So that's turned a positive. So if these, for example, just staying on managed services, if this vast number of jobs are going to be created here, we need people to run those. So maybe if there's a shift away from some of the other things, because you know, people may not be required because technology has evolved, but in the newer things that are coming onshore through this process of back offices being set up here. I'm just taking one example. And when you talk of these back offices, we're not talking of 1,000, 2,000 people. We are talking of just now, you know, people are talking of virtually running into hundreds of thousands of people. So I think things will evolve. And then when you talk of a person, you remember when the first wave of white collar, I would say, momentum was seen in the country, 2000, 2001, CRISIL had done a study, I remember, that for every white collar job created, 4 new jobs in the service sector were created around it. Now, these may not be full jobs, it could be partial jobs. I see the same thing happening as these white collar jobs are proliferated. So I'm not worried about that. And then I think we also need to look at, just look at the last 2 or 3 years, the number of Provident Fund registered people. If you look at these, it tells me a different story. And having the field force, as it were, is a big plus.
That indeed is a big plus. I want to, pick up on some of the things that you spoke of, and you talked about, of course, your favorite subject, which is the fact that there possibly needs to be a rewriting of economic theory when we talk about linking inflation and interest rates. I know that you have, for a while now, believed that the RBI and the MPC don't need to hike interest rates like the West is hiking at this point in time. It is a hard pause, or that is what we're given to understand that the MPC has taken at this point in time. Where do you see interest rates, at least in India, in the near term?
No, I see. When I was a practicing banker, I never commented on this. But now,
now you have the liberty to be more vocal
being
about
an armchair, maybe a layperson, I can say a few things. But I think the RBI has done absolutely the right thing in over the last 3 years. Not one misstep. So I can't blame the MPC. I do not know what happens in the MPC, but sum total, that's what you have seen. I think they have taken, India has taken a right stand. The issue that I have is with the West, economic theory that's coming out from the West, which in earlier periods influenced us. And now when it comes their turn, they're happily saying, that doesn't matter. So I think we need to understand that everything that the West says may not be appropriate for us. And we need to apply our mind and see what is right and do what is right. So that was my context in what I had said on this. But there's another aspect to this. Today, if you see the adverse impact of a rate increase could possibly be more harmful than what we thought. For example, if you look at a bank, today probably 70% of its assets that it holds are retail assets, on which there's an EMI. And you have a situation where you have a rate increase. It could push a whole lot of that repayment beyond retirement. So these are all risks which, today we are talking of risks, which need to be put into context when we look at this. I'm sure RBI does it, but what I'm asking is, does the larger body of economists actually look at this? Are there concrete numbers? Is this worked out? Is there a spreadsheet or whatever algorithm that you have worked out to say what is the impact and the consequence of this? Not just look at one indicator, look at it as a multivariate, and then let us see. I'm sure the Reserve Bank has done this. But I want a theory on this which is exploited here or outside. I would think the same thing would apply today to the US. So far they're not bothered, because with the sort of rate increases that you see on the mortgage front, from a year and a half back, a mortgage was around 3.5% or 4%. Today you're talking of 7.5%. How many people would move beyond retirement in terms of it? I have not yet seen the numbers. But these are things that today need to be crunched into economic theory. I'm talking of pure economic theory that comes out of schools to understand and appreciate. And I'm not seeing that in India, which is unfortunate.
Well, I'm going to take your view and your opinion on what we're seeing happen as far as the global banking sector is concerned, because you were very clear about the fact that the Indian banking sector today, along with corporate India, is far more resilient. Balance sheets have strength. We've just come off record numbers for a whole bunch of banks, including ICICI Bank for this quarter. But, on what is happening with global banks at this point in time, a jaw-dropping number, a $100 billion deposit plunge for First Republic Bank. What do you make of this and the long-term implications or the medium-term implications of how this is likely to pan out?
My straightforward answer is that it indicates that, again, vast holes in the risk management practices by both regulators there and the banks themselves. When this happened, I went into the balance sheet of that particular bank. And what struck me was I read it 3 times. I went into the P&L. The P&L has got a profit, nice profit. And the NPAs are in basis points, not even percentage points. You come to the balance sheet, item number 2 is, held to maturity instruments. Within brackets, the valuation is given. The value is shown as almost 100. And within brackets, current value shown as 84. So I said, am I reading right? And previous year it was 97 or something like that. So where has this, what has happened? Then it struck me that this is where the hole is. And it's not accounted for. It is just a line item. So if this is how you are looking at risk, then obviously you have I'm sure there are lessons which have been learned. I do not know how other regulators in other domains look at it, but this is not so in India. So I can be proud of what is in India. This sort of a thing can never happen in India. So that gives me confidence to say, apart from capital adequacy, which is in high teens, pristine NPA, net NPA levels lower than in some banks, 0.25%, and then this sort of very tight risk management practices, I think make us one of the safest banking systems anywhere.
Well, that's good to hear. You were talking about the role the regulators have played, and you believe that that's been a stellar performance here in India. In terms of what we are seeing play out in the domestic context, but more importantly also around the world, if there were one or two areas where you believe there needs to be strengthening of regulatory oversight, what would those be, in India specifically?
No, I would think that today, specifically, the needless move to corporates, who are the borrowers, and individuals who are the borrowers, where there may be a need for educating the borrower as to what is good and right. And this is not necessarily in the banking space, it is in the entire financial services space, where people are sometimes almost coaxed to say that, well, it doesn't matter. You get on your app and you swipe left or right and the deal is done. The deal is not done. You are basically building risk on your balance sheet as a consequence. I think so both sides, people who are providing this sort of a product, and on the other side, people who are consuming it, ought to be educated in a way. Similarly, if on a corporate front there is mismatched lending happening, is not linked to your ALCO situation, and borrowing also on the same basis, I think you are exposing yourself to risks when an event like wild fluctuation in interest rate happens. So I think there is there is need for better understanding of risk, even in your borrowing book, not lending book, in your borrowing book in the corporate world. And I think gentle education probably is required, not necessarily very hard. But at the retail individual end, I think something more dramatic needs to be probably done.
What more dramatic change would you like to see?
It says that I would put it very simply as to heighten the risk. Anybody puts out an ad saying XYZ, I think the regulator should have come out and say that these are the risks, or ask that company to spell out the risk very clearly and not in that blinding speed at bottom where you say that, like in the public issue, they used to say that subject to market risk. It's not no longer the case. I'm taking it as an example. But in ads which are propounding that, well, there is no risk in your transaction, I think there needs to be a counter.
Let me talk to you about two constituencies that a lot of people have been focused on. One, of course, is the big startup ecosystem, where we have seen significant gains being made. There has been plenty of disruption, but as you yourself pointed out, the risk is the lack of cash flows and sustainability and viability in the long term. We've also seen a flight towards being able to raise money through the IPO market, and we saw that process happen. The regulator has now come down hard, saying there needs to be adequate disclosure or strengthening the disclosure process. How do you see this landscape building itself out? What more do you believe needs to be done there from a risk mitigation point of view?
So we are talking of the new course, right?
Yes.
We are talking
Yes.
new course. I think the basic requirement there is that there should be a cash flow. Now, I don't know whether the regulator is going to insist on that, but the investor needs to be, and our investor is a very smart investor. So we have seen what has happened with the first, say, half a dozen listings. And I think it would be a brave company going out there with, without a cash flow which is positive. The reason is very simple. Because you got one shot at it, and this investor is not going to come back and give you any more sustenance. So you better be prepared to either have your original VE partner fund ad infinitum or to hit a wall. So I'm being brutally frank, but that's how it's going to be. So you better weigh, so it's like self-discipline in making sure that you are ready to hit the market, so that, and you keep running and don't then falter. So I think this lesson has been learned very well.
Yes, I think a lot of people are learning or relearning that lesson as well at this point in time. One of the other aspects that you brought up, and you gave a forecast. You said you wouldn't give one, but you did eventually end up giving one, where you said that you believe the single currency hegemony is likely to be sort of disrupted over the next 12 to 18 months on the back of the fact that we are now seeing bilateral arrangements being worked out, whether it's the rupee ruble mechanism or many others. You see that this transition happening as swiftly as the next 12 to 18 months?
What I mean is that it will gather momentum, and you will see the impact of that moment. The impact of the momentum is that alternative patterns will emerge, and alternative settlement mechanisms could emerge, and thereafter netting out could happen, and the surpluses will be held in a, I would say, a more distributed manner in terms of asset classes and currency classes and so on. This is natural evolution. It's natural evolution because you have two large developing economies now coming to the fore. And then you got, if you look at the entire BRICS, the entire sort of BRICS countries coming to the fore. So I think this is a natural evolution, and I don't see anything wrong. It is natural. Not many people know that BRICS also have something called the BRICS contingency measure, which is they have put in place, which if you go and look up, it is called the alternative IMF. So the BRICS countries have set up as long back as 8 years back in 2014. This was set up, well, it's almost 9 years back. The contingency reserve arrangement, which runs in a virtual mode. There are no offices, but ready to go. So there are a lot of steps being taken by the developing countries to make sure that their interests are in a way, they look after their own interests and not necessarily rely on third parties to come and intervene and provide a hand. That hand probably will be welcome, but they have prepared this. So this is all part of that process of change. As developing countries grow, they evolve and so on. And it's a large number of developing countries. The BRICS probably were at the forefront, but we will see larger and larger number of countries coming up and joining in a way since this sort of evolution that is happening.
You've been the perennial India bull, Mr. Kamath, and you continue to be extremely bullish on the India growth story. If I were to ask you to list out some of the key risks that we need to be mindful of, because we are here talking about risk mitigation. What would those key risks be? I mean, the legacy risks have been the infrastructure risk, the execution risk, the inflation risk, and so on and so forth. What would you put on the table today as the key risks that we need to be mindful of?
August leaders here who can answer this question better than I am, including starting with Mr. Jutshi and the practitioners of risk in corporate India. But I would think what is required today is not necessarily, I'm not looking at internally. What I'm looking at is events outside our control hitting us at once. Again, to paraphrase, I think what Bhargav said, several black swan events hitting us together, which we never thought could happen, and have now happened. And I think we are all learning to manage this as we go along. That, if this wasn't so, we would have been in dire problems. But having said that, the risk that we need to counter is an explosion in energy prices, for example. How do you handle that? And what does it do to your structural balance sheet of the country? I think we need to understand this. And I can say this, that the government and business is running at great speed to try to thwart this risk before it happens. And I would think in 4 or 5 years we would say that, well, that risk is not really as serious as it was, say, in 2023 or prior to that. So I think some of these risks are visible. The rest of it, to me, is external events creating, the apt-used phrase, a perfect storm. Other than that, I don't see internally course correction happening or needed.
Okay. So we need to be mindful of the invisible risks, some of the visible risks that you just spoke of. It was very interesting to me to hear you say that you actually were looking at the First Republic Bank balance sheet to see what was going on with line item. How much time do you spend on looking at balance sheets?
No, I look at everything. If I say a name that I need to look at, I look it up on Google immediately. I do a LinkedIn. How long does it take me? It takes me 45 seconds to understand who the person is.
So on an average in a day, how many companies do you look up?
I may look up 4, 5, 6, 7 or more. Whatever is of interest, it could be more than that, I look up. Before not coming here, I was going somewhere else. I looked up 5 balance sheets on money control, so not necessarily a company, to understand, this is in the banking space, to look at what has happened to capital, what has happened to profitability, what is happening to ROE. I was speaking somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I'll do it on the fly. It took me exactly 3 minutes, thanks to money control. Because in any case, you put the
well,
on
behalf of all of my colleagues at Money Control, thank you very much. That's wonderful to hear you say that.
The first thing to come up is money control. So I don't even have to scroll down to look at. I click and I get what I want. So.
You know, it's very interesting that you just brought up the banks again, and given the over 5 decades that you've spent there, here's what I want to understand from you. Yes, we've seen a cleanup. Yes, we've seen many changes being brought in. But you just talked about the ROE, and you said we've never seen this kind of metric being delivered by Indian banks. What do you think has been the biggest driver, the biggest change to be able to get to this
very
metric?
simply, very simple. Very simply, it is the provisions vanishing. So when your quality of book is fine, your credit losses vanish, and that credit loss vanishes, you are breathing deeply. And I think that's what's happening in the Indian banking system. I think everybody is breathing well and healthily, and that's the 20% ROE that we see. Everybody may not get there, but to me that was a wonderful number. And we talked about the Indian banking system and the Western challenges. And I'm not trying to put on anybody, but again, this house may not know it. If you look up the top 20 or 25 banks in the world today, you'll probably find 3 names by market cap. And you will not find a single bank from large parts of the Western world. You'll find a few American banks. You'll find 1 or 2 maybe Australian banks. And you'll find Chinese banks, of course. You'll find Indian banks. You'll find 1 Saudi Arabian bank. That's about it. Then we are hunting for names. There are no names. So why? I think this is basically the understanding, the market's understanding of risk. Where has risk moved and where is, where there is lesser risk, or where things are comfortable and you can breathe easy. And I think we have to take pride in this. I can say this, that 20 years back, it was an aspirational number to be in the top 50 by market cap. And market cap, I don't necessarily mean as something. It is a reflection of your health. That's what I mean. And I think we can be rightly proud of. And I look forward to the day when overall ranking of business, Indian companies are there in the top 25, and that I'm sure will happen in peak order, in large measure, not just 1 or 2.
Yes, and we will look forward to that as well. So let me end by asking you, Mr. Kamath, what has been the riskiest bet that you've taken in your career, and what do you believe is likely to be the riskiest bet that you're yet to take?
Yet to take? At 76? I don't know. No, the riskiest bet I had taken clearly was, I won't even hesitate, was basically repositioning ICICI from a development bank to a retail bank. We had no skills. We said that we will enter a business where we have no skills. And there weren't many practitioners either. There was only one home finance mortgage company, that was HDFC at that point of time. A couple of global banks were issuing a few credit cards. That's it. To say that we will bet on a pivot to retail, we will bet on introducing technology which no bank had tried globally. When I'll just tell you the sort of bet we took. When we rolled out our credit card platform, I was told that this platform with great difficulty can run on a small box. This is meant for a mainframe. So, and it can do about 200,000 cards. I have no choice because I can't afford a mainframe. So let's go. And that machine, that software we ran for the next 3 million cards. By then we could develop our own things and so on. So the pivot to retail, I think, was for an institution without any history or experience or people, was a big bet. So what did you bet on? So you must have something to bet on. We bet on our people. So we had a young team, several of them are here, who I said I can bet on, and they will build a future for us. A, and B, we had a board which was very supportive and said that we will go along with the bet. So that was the riskiest. I don't think there's any more risk in what I'm doing now.
A digital bank?
A digital bank? Everything is digital today. Everything is digital today. UPI is digital, and how far we are ahead of on the UPI front is unimaginable. I think people sitting here, we celebrate, but we don't understand. I'll give you a small example. I don't know whether my daughter will like this if she hears it. The last 1 year, she's come 4 times to see me because I said, I'm not traveling. Every time she comes, the first thing she says, Dad, can I have your phone? So first time I didn't understand what it was, and then 4 clicks later, she's done. She gives me back the phone. And then I look at my phone, I get a WhatsApp message, then I get a text message, then I get an email. Well, you know what has happened? She has done a quick purchase. From somewhere she has seen something, and she can't execute this in the US. And she can't do it at that speed in the US, even when she's doing a transaction in the US. Now she wants to do it here, and that phone works. And that is the new India. And that, I think, anybody having a grown-up child here will celebrate that. How do I explain this? That you guys are behind us. And I don't tell, I'm thinking the larger opportunity. And this is the opportunity that India presents. All this has happened seamlessly. And again, I'll just spend one more time on this. And then I saw what and where is this stuff coming from? As I can deduce it, these are small businesses run by individuals. But the whole ecosystem is so beautifully enmeshed. But this is my business sense taking over. That the moment the transaction is gone, a logistics partner is assigned by somebody, not by this individual. That individual has done either the design or the organization of this business. Probably it looks like a mom and pop outfit. The stuff that comes finally comes through a courier. The address is handwritten. The sender's name is handwritten. You would have seen this. I celebrate this because this, even 2 years, 3 years back, was unimaginable that India could do this. But there it is, and India has done it.
So the riskiest bet for KV Kamath today is leaving your phone unsupervised.
No, this is a supervised handover. So.
Mr. Kamath, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us here. Ladies and gentlemen, KV Kamath.